Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to today's live patient Q&A, Lifestyle Changes That Change the Game, with our special guest, Genny Mack. Hi, Genny.
Hi, Susan. Hi, Lupus LA. Hi, everyone. I am
Uh,
very grateful to be here.
we're thrilled to have you. A little background for Genny. Genny is a lupus patient and an inspiring nutrition and fitness coach, specializing in autoimmune health. Her wellness journey began after a near-death lupus flare back in 2018. And since then, she's dedicated her life to taking control of her health through mindful eating and movement. We're excited to hear about her lifestyle changes, those that made a huge difference for her. But before we dive into the conversation, I do want to highlight that the following Q&A is based on Genny's personal experience as a lupus patient. And this session will not be providing any medical advice. We do encourage you to consult your healthcare provider before making any changes to your care plan. Every case of lupus is different, so it's important to tailor your treatment to your unique needs with your own care team. With that said, let's get started.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, so Genny, why don't you start by sharing a little bit about your lupus diagnosis and what led you to these lifestyle changes?
Yes, so I was diagnosed with SLE lupus in 2018, and this was after having a very stressful work career. I worked as a certified public accountant, working on Wall Street. I was working near to 80 hours a week, living outside of my suitcase, always traveling and on the road, on top of being most of the time the only person of color in the room. So
Mm.
there was a lot of stressors just building up, and I'm pretty sure that that was a trigger to my first lupus flare in 2018. And it really exacerbated when I went onto a business trip. I went to India, which is very close to the equator, right? So the sun sensitivity, I guess just being stressed with work, being so far away from family, that sent me to this spiral where I was hospitalized for about 5 weeks. And I remember, so starting my holistic healing journey started with me asking the doctor, okay, so I take my medications, which I'll adhere to, because there's this whole journey about acceptance with the diagnosis, right? So at that point, I've accepted the diagnosis, take the medicine, but doctor, what do I eat? So that was the biggest question that I had on my journey. And the doctor's response, which, in hindsight, I try not to give judgment to, the doctor's response was eat whatever you want.
Mhm.
And that really started my holistic healing journey to figure out, because I knew that wasn't the answer, right? I knew there was some level of self control, some level of self determination to really make a big change in our lives, right? Especially just knowing what our ancestors have been through, wars and so much grief. So I knew that there was another way. And that question led me to start to do research to figure out how to manage lupus. So what was important for me was to uh, incorporate a holistic approach, right? An integrated approach. So listening to the doctor, right? The doctors are educated on lupus. They have tons of experience, but also taking control of what I can control,
Right.
right? And that included my lifestyle, what
Mhm.
I chose to engage in every day from a relationships perspective, how I manage stress, what I decided and chose to put into my body. So I started to learn those practices, and fast forward a few years, I was able to go into remission, feel better into my body, and then get another flare from COVID, right? So
Right.
learned a lot of lessons during this process, but ultimately I learned that we have the power to take control of our health.
Well, and I think what's so interesting is, you talk about stressors and things that were stressful in your life. And I know that you went on this journey and ultimately made this career change. How did stress in that position, like when did you decide this career is no longer healthy for me, or I can't control my stress in this role in a way that allows me to be healthy?
Yeah, that's a very good question because what I realized for the longest is that I would just go and do, right? I was a yes person. I was a pleaser, so to
Mhm.
say. I also have an A-type personality. So I always went for perfection. And after getting diagnosed with lupus, I mean, I ultimately say that lupus saved me because it forced me to actually listen in to what my body was communicating to me, right? If I
Mhm.
was getting symptoms of fatigue, honor that, tap into that, right? And after being hospitalized for the 5 weeks, right? Coming home, I had no choice but to take off of work,
Mhm.
right? So I applied for short-term disability. I was out of work for 4 months. So again, I was forced to listen to my body. And then after 4 months, I went back into the workforce and the stress was just not manageable.
Yeah.
You know, the expectations were the same. The long hours of traveling, just the microaggressions that I experienced in the workplace. So the expectations didn't change. But I also learned in that journey that it's also important to speak up as well, because I know that I have a responsibility and I share this with my community to communicate lupus, right? Because a lot of people don't know what lupus is. They don't
Right.
understand the disease and the severity of the symptoms. So we each have a responsibility, right? We have our own responsibility as lupus individuals living with lupus to be honest about how we're feeling. So I realized there was that disconnect with the expectations and the clear
Mhm.
communication. And shortly after, I decided to leave that company. And I then decided to go into a more, I guess, 9 to 5
Mhm.
environment, which was helpful for about 2 years. But during that time, my studied and my interest and my passion in holistic health continued. So at some point during the pandemic, it kind of became impossible to do, you know, my full-time job and to do this
Right.
wellness coaching as a passion. So that's my story in terms of how I transitioned, but really just identifying that this high demand, high pressure environment was actually a stressor and a trigger to my lupus flares.
Yeah.
So I think it was important for me at that moment to acknowledge that and to change my environment, right? Again, going back to the power to be able to change our situation and believing that we have that power in us. Yeah, so that's big about stress.
Well, and that takes a lot of bravery, right? And a lot of risk in changing careers. But as you're saying, you're sort of on this journey. You know that other people are also on this journey. So, finding a way to give voice to that is to me super brave. So let's talk a little bit about some of the specifics, right? So you talk a lot about mindful eating, and we'd spoken before, and I told you, I think that's such a great way to talk about it instead of saying clean eating or a certain kind of diet, being mindful. So that's a big part of your approach. What were some of the initial dietary changes you made? And how quickly did you notice improvements in your lupus I can't speak today, symptoms? And are there any like go-to meals that you feel are very nourishing, especially when you're going through a flare or something that's very comforting to you?
All very good questions. So what changed the game for me in terms of diet, and even diet can be a tricky word, right?
Mhm.
Because my philosophy is about being mindful about the food that we're putting into our bodies and doing it in a sustainable way, right? And the tricky part with our society and the world that we live in today is there are so many diets. Right, you have the anti-inflammatory diet, there's a hypernourishment diet, the vegan diet, the alkaline diet, the carnivore diet. It's like diet, 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 right? But
Yes.
we have to be able to take a step back and think about how food nourishes our body? I think that's the priority. How does food nourish our body? And then we have to be our best advocate to understand how food makes us feel. And we
Mhm.
have to redevelop these relationships with food because of all these diets and just going through all these symptoms, it can really be hard to trust what you're eating and what you're putting into your body. So there's a lot of mindful work that comes behind eating. There's intentionality, but there's also this process of knowing and relearning food, right? So to answer your question more directly, what diet worked best for me? A diet that was, or a way of eating, I should say, because I still incorporate those same principles today, a way of eating that focuses on eating whole foods from Mother Nature,
Mhm.
foods that are not processed or minimally processed, foods that are rich in vitamins and minerals and essential phytonutrients,
Mhm.
right? We need vitamins, especially with lupus and autoimmune conditions. A lot of the times we're nutrient deficient.
Mhm.
So prioritizing those foods that are whole in nature and nourishing. So I adopted this whole food, plant-based predominant way of eating. I was actually vegan for 4 years. And then when I went through this most recent lupus flare after having COVID in 2023, that changed my perspective of eating too.
Mhm.
At one point in time, I wasn't able to digest, I didn't have the structure, the stature to digest enzymes in live food, although I know how valuable they could be, right? So I started incorporating animal-based foods, bone broths to help coat the gut lining of the stomach. I started to incorporate fish because fish is high in omega-3 that can help reduce inflammation, right? So that helped me at that point in time. But now, actually, that I have more energy, more clarity, I'm going back to eating predominantly plant-based foods, right? So I would say just really start with going back to basics, going back to simplicity, nourishing your body with whole and unprocessed foods, listening to your body, right, to make those adjustments along the way. Of course, if you have food allergies or intolerances, figure those out, work with your doctor, work with an allergist, a GI doctor to figure that out, but just start slow,
Mhm.
right? Start slow. Get rid of the processed food, right? I typically like to focus on approach that prioritizes what we should eat, right? Because there's so much misinformation and miseducation out there with foods that we shouldn't eat, right?
Right.
But what about those foods that we should eat? And it's a given in terms of the foods that we shouldn't eat. Again, the processed foods, the junk foods, get rid of that and then focus on the whole nourishing foods.
I think that's great. And educating yourself, right? What works for you, which is, as we're saying, it's so different for each person, but there are certain things that are, as we know, are just not good, and sometimes we should have them anyway. But it's all within, balance and reason.
Mhm.
Okay, so also in this sort of wellness journey is exercise and movement, right? And what's challenging for people with lupus often is joint pain and fatigue, which clearly you've also experienced. So how did you introduce movement into your routine? And what
Mhm.
exercises seem to work best for you?
Yeah, so I understand that exercising with lupus, especially if you're in a flare, like you said, when you have joint pain. I was just speaking to someone the other day. It was almost impossible for them to walk, right? So mobility issues. How do you start? And if I rewind to the last life-threatening flare last year, early last year, it almost took me out. It was awful. It was terrible. I was bedridden. When I tried to stand up, I could barely walk from my bedroom to the
Mm.
bathroom. The bottom of my feet hurt so bad. So I can definitely understand what it feels to have limitations in your body. You just can't do it, right? And there's research out there too to show that you can actually exacerbate a flare if you push through with exercise, right? Exercise is actually a form of stress. It's a stressor to your body. I mean, people may call it a healthy stress, but you're stressing your muscles, right? Muscle atrophy. You're stressing your muscles so that they can grow bigger and stronger. So exercise is a stressor. I would say that it's important to, first of all, listen to your body. If you can't do it, you can't do it. But you can definitely start somewhere, right? Whether that is taking a walk in your building to start out with. I always say if you could get outside every day, get some fresh air, that's a bonus.
Mm-hmm.
So I started my movement healing journey, my mindful movement healing journey by doing just that. So going for a walk, once a day, just a 10-minute walk. And it was zero point 0.2 miles to start out with, two
Mm-hmm.
blocks. And then I just continued that, right? I had this determination and I told myself every day that I am healing. I will recover from this flare. So a walk turned into a stretch turned into a yoga session, a restorative yoga
Mm-hmm.
session. Then a yoga session turned into physical therapy, right? Physical therapy turned into a strength session with my body weight. Then I added on 5 pounds, right? So that's why I always say, just in this journey in general, whether it's eating differently to nourish your body, or whether it's building muscle and strength, start slow,
Yeah.
but just start. Just start.
Fantastic advice. And I think, so we're talking about nutrition and we're talking about movement. And then you said, you told yourself that this was going to be something that you were going to do. So let's talk a little bit about the importance of mental wellness in this journey, right? That's for everybody, but especially for patients with chronic illness and with lupus patients. So how has stress management been factored into your healing, and what mindfulness do you use? Do you use relaxation practices? Sort of, what is the mental health side of the journey?
Yeah, there's actually a few practices. I love that you asked this question because the world that we live in today actually doesn't prioritize mental health. And
Mhm.
mental health is extremely important to our healing journeys. We're one person. We're stronger when we focus on our physicality, but our mental and our spiritual well-being. So I really appreciate this question because I feel like once we tap into our emotional well-being and our mental health, then that's when we could start to make strides on our recovery journey. So early on in my healing journey, is as difficult as it was to tell myself otherwise. I mean, there were days where it just felt like I wasn't gonna go on, to be completely transparent. I would tell myself otherwise. I remember getting this notebook, and I wrote affirmations in the notebook every single day. Even though I had joint inflammation, right? I would write 3 things that I was thankful for in that day. And then
Yeah.
I would also write 1 thing that I was looking forward to in the next day. And I
Mm.
did that every single day for 3 months. And it was so powerful to help me see, and I did reflection as well. It was powerful to help me see where I was then and where I am now. And I actually recorded this journey and I've shared it, publicly on social media. And that was a way to keep myself accountable on this journey, that I'm going to keep my mindset strong,
Yeah.
regardless of the chatter. I'm going to tell myself that I'm going to get through this. So I do believe that affirmations are extremely powerful. In my community, I tell my community to create your me time, right?
Mm.
So Susan's time, Jenny's time,
Mhm.
whoever is watching, me time. Create that time for yourself every day and make that time non-negotiable, right? Just 30 minutes. Just give yourself 30 minutes. And during that time, pour into yourself the best way you know how to, the best way that you can. Again, whether that's writing affirmations, whether that's going outside for a walk, taking a deep breath, whether that's sitting in silence, whether that's practicing your spirituality and giving gratitude to your day, set that me time and make sure that that's non-negotiable.
I I love that advice. I love that advice for everybody, especially every woman, where
Yes.
we tend to put everybody else first and to do everything else. I was going to ask you as really one of our last questions, the way that you would start or what you would suggest, in a non-medical sort of way for somebody to start. But I think you really answered that, which is sort of being accountable for yourself, putting yourself first. Um, I think that's very powerful.
Thank you. Yes, and just again all those points to start small.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get overwhelmed. We also want these quick fixes. We're in pain, but sometimes it takes, more conversations with the doctor to figure out how to relieve that pain and then go back to focusing on what you can control. The other thing I would leave with would be to listen to your body. And I find that that probably is one of the hardest activities to do is to listen to our body. And listening to our body means we have a stomach ache after we just ate something. Listen to that, right? Tap into that. What does that mean? You're starting to feel agitated after a specific situation. Is that stress elevating and increasing, right? So I also find that the more that we tap into our body, the more that we can start to figure out the trends and the triggers that it can be potentially causing our flares, right? And we could start to prevent them and lessen them so that we can live more of an abundant and joyous life.
All beautiful, and your attitude is inspiring to me, and I'm sure to our community. I would say before we close, Brianna, do we have any questions that you'd like for Genny from the community?
Yeah, we do. Um,
Awesome.
okay, do you eat nightshades in your plant-based diet? If no, do you notice a difference in your symptoms?
Great question. I think that goes back to the diet culture. There's a heavy focus on this anti-inflammatory diet to avoid nightshades. I will say that nightshades contain two things, lectins, which are considered anti-nutrients, right? So they can be inflammatory when consumed in the body, but at the same time, these vegetables, so we're talking about red bell peppers, potatoes, for example, sometimes these foods can also be anti-inflammatory for some people, right?
Mm.
So I would say in my personal experience, I eat nightshades. I eat predominantly fruits and vegetables that are growing seasonally because I want to make sure that I'm getting the best chance of nourishing my body with fruits and vegetables that are growing now, right? The vitamins and the minerals are dense. It probably was just harvested by the farmer the day before. So I would say start again by eating whole foods that are seasonal and then be your best advocate to tap into your body, right? That's why they have the elimination diets to say these are groups and categories, but you might be fine with eating onions and not fine with eating eggplant, right? So I just say, play around with incorporating different foods into your way of eating and see how you feel. Journal it.
That's awesome. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Mhm.
Great.
Fantastic. So, thank you so much for joining us, Genny. This really was a pleasure. It's
You're welcome.
important for lupus patients to share their wins and losses in our community, and we're so happy to provide a platform where stories and experiences like yours are shared. If you're watching this session today and you're not already a part of our community, please sign up in the link below so you don't miss out on future Q&As. We'll also provide links and contact information for Genny if you choose to reach out to her. And of course, you can always reach out to us at info@lupusla.org, and we can forward Genny any questions you might have. Thanks for joining us, Jenny. Great to spend time with you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. And
Appreciate it.
hope to see you again soon.
Okay, be
care.
well.